Hi everyone. I wanted to do a video for Gawain and the Green Knight. That's our reading for this week. So there are a couple of things that I want to make sure you understand about Gawain and the Green Knight and how it relates to English and the evolution of the English language. So what you may notice is that it's a little bit different from Beowulf. Beowulf was written before the Norman conquest, so there is no French influence in the language of Beowulf. But with Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, it's written in Middle English, so even though the actual manuscript is difficult for us to read because we speak modern English, even though it's difficult for us to read, we still can pull some French influence out of the words themselves. So there is some French influence. We also see a little bit of that Germanic just because, Beowulf was a Germanic, written with a Germanic influence. So we still see that lingering in English language. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight also has some Latin and some Celtic influences as well, but predominantly we see the biggest change in that French influence. Another thing that I want to point out in comparison to Beowulf is this idea of alliterative verse. All right, so when we talked about Beowulf, I talked about alliteration, and alliteration is the repetition of a consonant at the beginning of a word. And so verse is poetry. So alliterative verse is alliteration in poetry. And when we looked at Beowulf is written with alliterative verse. And Beowulf has, if you remember, the caesura. The caesura is a pause between beats in a poem. Well, in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, there is no caesura. There is no caesura in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. There is alliterative verse, but the caesura has been eliminated. Now, we don't know who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, so the poet for Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is referred to as the Pearl Poet. The Pearl Poet had a distinctive formatting or structure to the poems that the Pearl Poet created. So the structure that we see in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is not predominant in Anglo-Saxon poetry, and that structure is called the bob and wheel structure. Now, the bob and wheel structure is fairly easy to identify. So what we have, this segment is a segment from Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. It's not translated into modern English, but it doesn't have to be for us to understand the bob and wheel. So the bob and wheel has three components. So the first component of the bob and wheel is the alliterative verse component. This is the largest section of a bob and wheel poetic device. And this is where all the alliteration happens. So this is very similar to what Beowulf kind of looks like, where we have lines that have repeating letters. So I'm going to go through the first couple of lines to just identify that alliteration, just so you can make sure you know what I'm talking about. So in this blue section up here, we have alliterative verse. So line 1, we have the S, S, S repetition. In line 2, we have the B, B, B repetition. In lines 3 and 4, we have the letter T repeated quite a bit. All right, so alliteration is when you've got that repetition of a consonant or of a letter. And then after the alliterative verse, we have what's called the bob. So the bob is the second piece of this bob and wheel structure. The bob is a two-word phrase. So we see it here in yellow, with when. It's a two-word phrase, and it connects the alliterative verse section to the wheel section. It connects those two sections. Now, the wheel, that's the third part of a bob and wheel, And the wheel is what makes this poetic structure so different from that Anglo-Saxon structure, because Anglo-Saxon poetry did not rhyme. And the wheel section of a bob and wheel does rhyme. So the wheel always comes at the end of a section of poetry, and it always has an A, B, A, B, A rhyme scheme. So I'll go through that and kind of remind you how to identify rhyme schemes. So the rhyme scheme always begins with the bob. So we have when is the last word of the bob, when. So our first line, we're going to identify that as A. And then we look at the next line, and the last word of the next line is wonder. Well, wonder does not rhyme with when. So we're going to give that a new letter. So now we have A, B. We look at the third line, therein, and therein does not rhyme with wonder, but it does rhyme with when and therein. So since when is letter A, therein is also a letter A. The next word in the next line is blunder. Blunder rhymes with wonder, so that will be a B. And then sin is the last word of the last line, and it rhymes with when and therein, so it gets an A as well. So now we have A, B, A, B, A rhyme scheme. So that's what a bob and wheel poetic structure looks like, and it is exclusive to the Pearl poet. It is not something that we would normally see in Anglo-Saxon poetry. So let's talk about the history of what is happening in the world during the time that Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is written. So probably the most prominent event are the Crusades. So the Crusades are also called Holy Wars, right? They're the Holy Wars. They start around 1096 and they last until about 1291. But the reason that the Crusades even got started is because the Catholic Church wanted control over the land, the Holy Land, so that they could have access to where Christ was supposed to be buried, that holy sepulcher. So the Holy Lands, that's Jerusalem. They wanted Jerusalem. So in 1099, the church captured Jerusalem. And that kind of began the Crusades in this historical context. So then after they captured Jerusalem, they want to then move on and capture Damascus in Syria. But they were met with Muslim forces, and Muslim forces then recaptured Jerusalem and denied them Damascus. And then after that, the church gained Cyprus and Acre. But then Saladin, he was a Muslim leader. He declared that everyone, Christian, Jews, Muslims, everyone was welcome in Jerusalem for religious purpose. And then the church wanted to capture Egypt, but they ended up capturing Constantinople. That was later recaptured, but they did capture Constantinople. And then, for years and years and years and years after these major crusades, more crusades happen. People have been fighting holy wars, it seems like, since the dawn of time. But what I want you to kind of realize or notice is that these crusades created a conflict between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And this is still seen today. We still see news reports. We still see, crimes. We still see battles, wars all across the globe between Muslims, Christians, and Jews. So this conflict is still something that goes on today. So I added this in here because I wanted you guys to see a comparison between Hollywood's version of King Arthur and history's version of King Arthur. We see that beauty standards have changed quite a bit from the time King Arthur would have been alive to today. All right, so I get a lot of questions when we talk about Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Because Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is an Arthurian legend, a lot of people want to know, was King Arthur a real person? And the truth behind that is we don't really know. We don't have any proof that King Arthur existed. We know that the legend of King Arthur shows up in writing about the time that the Crusades begin. We don't have any proof that Arthur was a king outside of those writings. Now, in the 5th and 6th centuries, so the 400s and 500s, we do see writing about a man named Arthur who led an English group of men into battle against Germanic invaders, so against Anglo-Saxons. And then again in the 800s and 900s, so the 9th and 10th century, we see more writing about a warrior named Arthur. So is this the same man? Historians don't really know. What we do know is that the first mention of the author that we know today, so King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, are from the sources that were written during and after the Crusades. So I included this quote here because it gives us a good connection between King Arthur and the Crusades and why religion is so important in this particular lesson. So they believed during the Crusades, the Christians who went to battle against the Anglo-Saxons believed that if they were marked with the cross of the Christian faith, so if they had a cross on their armor, on their helmets, on their swords, on their shields, that and they died in battle fighting against those pagan Saxons, they would absolutely go to heaven. No questions asked. It didn't matter what kind of man or woman, or it didn't matter what kind of person they were. If they were marked with the cross during the Crusades, they would go to heaven. So this links like that idea to Arthur's Knights of the Round Table to the Crusaders because they had been marked with the cross. And it also is interesting to note that in the writings that we have discovered, Arthur claims to be a close relative of Queen Helen and her son, Emperor Constantine. So Constantine founded Constantinople, and they are regarded as the first people to convert to Christianity in the Roman Empire. So King Arthur is credited, I guess, through legend, is credited for bringing Christianity to the Roman Empire. All right, so let's talk about chivalry. This is related to the story itself. So if you've not read the story before you watch this video, it's okay. Just know that chivalry is very important. There is a code of chivalry and there is a code of courtly love that we're going to talk about. And those ideas, those social ideas, get Gawain in a lot of trouble. So the main idea here is that this is the queen and she wants to seduce Gawain. But the queen is obviously married to the king and Gawain is a knight of the king. So that presents a lot of problems for him. So let's look at the 10 codes of chivalry. So if you notice, it looks a lot like the 10 commandments. And that is not by accident. They were very faithful, very devoted in their faith. And so everything that we're doing up to this point socially is to be like all of the teachings from the Bible. So these 10 codes of chivalry, thou shalt believe all that the church teaches and observe all its directions. So do what your clergymen tell you to do and don't argue with them. You shall defend the church. So if someone attacks the church, it is your job as a knight to defend it. Thou shalt respect all weaknesses and shall constitute thyself as the defender of them. So it is a knight's job to defend all things weaker than they are. So, women, children, they should respect all weaknesses and they should defend those. Thou shalt love the country in which thou wast born. Thou shalt not recoil before thine enemy. So, no running away. If your enemy wants to fight, you have to fight. Thou shalt make war against the infidel without cessation and without mercy. So infidel here is just non-Christian. Anyone who doesn't believe in the Christian faith. Thou shalt perform scrupulously thy feudal duties if they be not contrary to the laws of God. So feudal duties, that is like this lord and vassal relationship. So it's similar to comitatus, where the knights would be the lord. They would have lands, they would be the lords, and then people would work the land, farm the land, and it was the knight's job to make sure that the people that worked his land were taken care of, were fed, were housed. And so that's what it means by performing feudal duties. Thou shalt never lie and shall remain faithful to thy pledged sword. This is the code that Sir Gawain ends up having trouble with. Thou shalt be generous and give largesse to everyone. So if a knight has money and someone is in need of money, he would give it. And thou shalt be everywhere and always the champion of the right and the good against injustice and evil. So those are the codes of chivalry. Those are the codes that the knights kind of had to follow, the rules that they had to follow. But then they also had the 12 rules of courtly love. So if someone in the court wanted to be romantically involved with someone, these are kind of the rules that they had to follow. So thou shalt avoid avarice like the deadly pestilence and shall embrace its opposite. So what we mean here is... Oh, I dropped my pencil. Hang on. Here you go. What we mean here is with avarice, we mean greed. Avoid being greedy. Thou shalt, number 2, thou shalt keep thyself chaste for the sake of her whom thou lovest. So we are not sleeping around, I guess, in today's terms. They did not involve themselves with many people. Thou shalt not knowingly strive to break up a correct love affair that someone else is engaged in. So this one is troubling. So in today's terms, I guess we could call this like, don't be a home wrecker. Don't break up a marriage. But the queen is asking Sir Gawain, like, she wants to seduce Gawain. But the queen is married to the king. So if Gawain does what he's told by the queen, if he is obeying his queen, then he is breaking this rule. Thou shalt not choose for thy love anyone whom a natural sense of shame forbids thee to marry. So if someone has a bad reputation, then you are not supposed to be with that person if you are a knight. Be mindful completely to avoid falsehood. So again, don't lie. Thou shalt not have many who know of the love affair, so don't boast of your relationship. Being obedient in all things to the commands of ladies, thou shalt ever strive to ally thyself to the service of love. So again, Gawain here, he is not supposed to break up a marriage to abide by number 3, but then he's supposed to be obedient in commands of ladies. So if he does number 3, then he breaks number 7. If he does number 7, then he breaks number 3. So he's in a tough spot. Number 8, in giving and receiving love solaces, let modesty be present. Speak no evil. Thou shalt not be a revealer of love affairs, so don't go telling everybody's business. Don't spill this tea. Thou shalt be in all things polite and courteous. And in practicing the solaces of love, thou shalt not exceed the desires. So this is kind of where consent is based. You shall not do anything in the actions of love that your partner does not agree to. So those are the rules of love. So there are some contradictions here that Gawain finds himself facing in the story. And then we have this idea of symbolism. So the pentangle is one of the most predominant symbols in this particular story. So the pentangle is this 5-pointed star here. That's a pentangle. And it is symbolic for 5 different reasons, and each of those reasons has 5 different aspects. So 1 point is symbolic for Christ's 5 wounds. So he had 2 wounds in his hands, 2 in his feet, and 1 in his side. It is also symbolic of the 5 ways of faith, or the faithful in 5 ways. So you're compassionate, you have purity, courtesy, generosity, and love. It also represents Mary's 5 joys. So the Annunciation, when she is told she is carrying Jesus. The Nativity, so Jesus' birth. The resurrection, so we know what resurrection. The ascension, Jesus' ascension to heaven. And then the Assumption is when Mary is assumed to heaven. The next point in the pentangle is the 5 senses, so taste, sight, sound, touch, and smell. And then the last point in the pentangle represents a powerful fighter. So a fighter has 5 fingers. So the 5 fingers represents that 5th point in the star. It also has ties to fidelity or loyalty. It's an endless knot, so it doesn't have a stopping point or a starting point. And it makes the sign of the cross. If you are drawing it out, then it crosses itself. So those are reasons why we see the pentangle so symbolically in Arthurian legend stories. One piece of information that I want you to understand before you read or as you read is just quick vocabulary word. A girdle is more like a belt in this context. It is not a garment that women wear to make them appear thinner. A girdle is something worn around the hips to carry bags or swords or whatever. It's more like a belt device than it is a garment for women. In the next video, next week, I will be going over the study guide questions so that you have a good sense of what the story is and what it means and how it relates to English literature so that you have something to study for the midterm exam. Thanks, guys. I'll see you later.